Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters, and I have some explosive news to share with you today. The biggest news of latest couple of days is the strike around the city of Feodosia in Crimea by Ukrainians over here. In this city, a harbor was struck by Ukrainian missiles, most probably Storm Shadow or something else, and it caused a huge explosion with a huge fireball that is giving rounds in a media story. What was struck was the Russian big landing ship that is used to transport equipment right now instead of use for landing. Initially in the war, there was a threat to landing in around Odessa, which is this city over here that Russia really wants to capture. And Putin has been recently calling this city as a Russian city, and they really would like to get there. Unfortunately, they never were even close. So after that, as the war kind of moved on, the ships, especially a lot of these landing ships, they were moved back to Russia towards the harbor of Feodosia, to Crimea, and now they are operating as a transport ship to get the ammunition from the Russian mainland, more specifically from the city of Novorossiysk, which is over here. So what they were doing is they were getting cargo from Novorossiysk to Feodosia to then supply Crimea additionally. You might ask, why Novorossiysk instead of using this Kerch bridge by using rail? Well, the whole goal is kind of simple because Novorossiysk is also used to supply the equipment that Russia is getting from Iran. So it's getting there, and it's gonna getting from this city over here to Iran. I hope you see approximately. This is Iran, by the way, over here down here. So all in all, Russia has been. They stated that in the news that the ship was slightly damaged. It was specifically said damaged, not destroyed. In Russian language, there's a little bit of a gradation. So when they say поврежден, that means like slightly damaged, maybe like a little bit of bruises. Unfortunately for Russians, the pictures already are making the rounds, and we see that the fireball didn't just came near the ship, it was actually the ship itself. It was a very nice operation. Like the kind of the most important takeaway from this is not just that the ship was destroyed, but the fact that it was a very well executed operations with couple of very notable differences compared to the other strikes in Crimea that we know of. First one, this was a strike when a ship was in harbor. It was in full operations. The ship just came in. It wasn't on repairs. It wasn't stationary there for a long time. It was still full of cargo, so it was yet to be unloaded. Beyond that, second part that is interesting is that this strike was not a combined strike. A pattern that we've seen before was that Ukrainians would use a lot of drones and they would overload Russian air defense systems. And by overloading Russian air defense systems, they would then be able to snuck in a couple of strikes also on the value targets by the Storm Shadow missiles. This was not the case this time. It felt like the Russian air defense didn't operate at all during this strike. Right now, I was able to find two theories that are answering this question a little bit, and I don't know which of this theory is correct, which is wrong. Your guess is as good as mine. But the first one being that a little bit before a Russian air defense system, like there was explosions heard in the area of Kerch over here a couple of days before. And it felt like that something was going on. And what happened was that this was specifically this Feodosia anti-air system that is located here. It picked up some targets around Kerch, and then it fired the anti-air missiles to the area of Kerch, and Kerch residents and everyone else heard these big explosions of the anti-air systems. But there was, as it turned out, no target at all. It was just some weird lag. And potentially there was some news of that, and Ukrainians wanted to test it, whether or not Russians would also consider, if it was a singular target, that they might consider this another kind of lag in a system that, oh, if it was just a one missile flying in, well, who would fly just a one single missile if all of the strikes before were combined strikes? The other proposed idea was that about a month before, Ukraine has been executing some of the additional combined strikes on Crimea with drones and so on, and little to no images of strikes and results of those strikes came out. So what people are maybe saying that potentially those strikes that were happening before did indeed reach out to destroy certain anti-air assets in other parts of Crimea, and therefore Feodosia anti-air systems were either relocated or they were looking in some other direction, and they were not able to pick up these couple of missiles that just flew in, and Ukraine was kind of exploiting the way that the Russians were operating and moving these brigades, these units. The main kind of point of all of this, of both of these theories, is that Ukraine has deep information about the strikes and how they're happening and what the targets are. So it was a very complex operation, more complex than just striking some target and then that target just explodes. There was a lot of layers beneath that. And Russians understood that, and one of the interesting outcomes of this strike was that Feodosia and the city around it was instantly locked in, and there were searches ongoing, searching for spies, internal checks and so on, and not just the regular activities. On the other parts of the front line, right now, a little bit of a talk, because it's a Russian propaganda narrative, is that they've captured the village of Marinka. Marinka, if you see here, and this kind of thicker red line here that's delimiting, that is the line of the pre-2022 aggression. This is like a demarcation line that stopped after initial Russian aggression in 2014. And what you might notice that it's a relatively small area. So when Russians are now reporting that they have captured Marinka, what you need to understand that this area is extremely slow. They were capturing the last 200 meters of de facto village of Marinka for over 2 months. So it was 100 meters per month that they were advancing in this direction. And the most important thing to understand here is that Marinka here is not an existing city. You can see this on the footage yourself. It's just a pile of rubble. It doesn't really matter by this point. It's not a city. It's not really relevant that much. It's not a strategic ground that will allow Russia to advance further, because further there is already additional defense lines that Ukraine has built, and this is just Russians attacking. So all of this propaganda narrative that Russia has captured Marinka is beyond, is nothing more than just propaganda narratives. About the rest, I will talk in a second part of the video, but now I want to bring your attention that we have started a new campaign with the NAFO 69 sniffing brigades to get 2 trucks to the 2 units of Ukrainian armed forces directly. NAFO 69 has been great support this whole year, and I just think that it's a great idea to finalize this year, also working with the guys and delivering the NAFO 2.0 trucks to Ukrainian armed forces. The biggest difference of a 2.0 trucks is that now they have drone jammers, something absolutely crucial to have on the front lines in Ukraine right now, because drones are everywhere, and this is extremely relevant. Check out the link in description. Please go. You can watch the requests from the units specifically. Let's do this. Let's get those 2 trucks, and I hope this will be a great New Year's and Christmas presents for the Ukrainian armed forces from our channel community. Thank you so much, guys. And now let's go to the second part of the video. Second important topic that has not been covered a lot in Western media is the General Zaluzhny's recent conference, where he for over half an hour have been talking with journalists and answering their questions. So a lot of questions around the war, around mobilization, and how Zaluzhny sees the war developing further. First point that he made is he underlined that other experts, specifically Western experts, have little to no understanding of what the war is like on the ground in Ukraine and how the war is going and what's the situation on the ground. it is very critical for us because we are not often within the Ukrainian sphere of news. We are very often in our Western sphere of Western experts talking about how they see the war. And more importantly, I always try to underline this, that we do not have the depth of information. But what General Zaluzhny is stating here is that almost all of the experts in the West, he said, if I can semi-quote him because it's a translation, is that there very low number of people that actually understand it. He didn't name names, unfortunately, but the point still stands. And this was then supplemented by his quote that when he was trying to explain to the Western generals, the Western command and NATO command and so on about how the war is looking like in Ukraine, he got a lot of critique, he got a lot of pushback to that. However, as he is demonstrated right now on a battlefield with more and more analysis coming out, with now even Western analysts realizing this, like, yes, this is indeed how the war is, the General Zaluzhny was right. His assessment of warfare was correct. The Western assessments, all of the generals that were preparing themselves, reading all of the books about the warfare, they were for maybe previous war, but not for this one. You can look up in history, this was almost always the case, and we need to understand that the war that Ukraine is fighting right now, and specifically General Zaluzhny, he has the cutting edge knowledge and understanding what specifically works in this war, what doesn't. Then he also commented about the reviews of his article to The Economist, and more specifically to the misunderstanding of what he was stating. He was telling what actually I was telling you, which is I was very pleased that how he was expressing it was in the same flow as I explained to you in a video, which you can watch. I will link it somewhere. But in that article, General Zaluzhny was indeed not stating that the war is now in a stalemate. What he was telling is that the stalemate is possible if there is no work on the current problems done. That instead of us like going forward with how we have been proceeding before, we need to adapt. We need to develop technologies and solutions for specific problems, and we need to have a certain way to solve these problems, and we're working to solve these problems. That he and his team was already having a plan, and they already analyzed what was the issues, for example, for summer offensive and why it did stall, and they are already working. He did mention that about 90% of all of the problems already have the solutions, and they already being worked on to get implemented for 2024. And he stated specifically, underlined that this means that the war will not turn into a stalemate. But that article has been misquoted so many times from so many sources, and it's been like all over the news by the Western journalists that were just like, oh yeah, let's just surrender. Like, it felt like the Western journalists, now that the Western leaders have stopped trying to surrender to Putin and were not able to surrender to Putin because it was Ukraine that was fighting the war. Now it's like journalists are taking, okay, don't worry, politicians, we're going to get there for you. And now the journalists are going making rounds and trying to find a surrender for Putin in any way they can, which is a little bit shitty. It's really, really bad that we're in this situation, that we're getting the most important parts wrong about this war. There's still this red herring narrative that this is a land war, that if Putin gets some kind of a piece of land, some kind of a victory, firstly, like, it's so sickening. Like, I gotta say, every time I read something like this, like, something inside of me just twists. It's like, let's give some Putin some kind of a victory. Let's give him something so he's then satisfied. Like, have you learned nothing about history? Have you learned nothing about Putin and appeasement of aggressors? And even beyond that, Putin has been killing people, genocide. His campaign goes on stealing children. His army is torturing and killing civilians every day. And he says it. And everyone is kind of just like okay with this. It's like, yeah, let's just feed him an arm and then he will stop. Like it's an actual real thing. There's an actual some kind of a position even to have that. Am I taking crazy pills here? Am I the only one that is like, well, I'm not, I know I'm not the only one. I know you guys are here, but you understand what I mean is like, he's a murderer. He's a dictator. He is a bloody, absolutely genocidal maniac. The fact that he is going around and torturing and killing people, and the only way that we're not technically being overflowed with the images like we have from Bucha and so on, with all of the torture chamber. Remember, torture chamber for kids in Kherson? Anyone? Torture chamber for kids. Let's just negotiate with him. Let's just give him something. I understand pro-Russian politicians, they're getting money for it. But it maddens me. It should not be that hard to be a decent human being. Even if you're a journalist, like, why? Just like find some humanity. It's not about the territory. Just look at the history. It's not gonna work. It never did. And it never will work. Sorry, a little bit of I went on a tangent. But Zaluzhny then talked about some other topics as well. He was talking about that the land, like what I was explaining to you as well, Alon, that in the Ukrainian military, they don't see land right now as a specific thing that is required to be held on at all costs. That's why, for example, regaining territory at all costs is not seen that this is something that we need. What General Zaluzhny, and he underlines this, that what they're looking for is defeating the Russian military. And then kind of the land will come after Russian military is defeated. And from my side, I can say, let's take Russia as an example here. We talk a lot about Ukraine. Let's take Russia, for example. Russia has lost over half of territory of Ukraine that they captured past 2022 invasion. But they've lost that territory. Have they stopped the war? And the answer is no. So if Russian army is not defeated, then the potential of Russian military to then come back to Ukraine still stands, because Ukraine cannot go into Russia and fight. We know that it's not politically viable. So I think, and Zaluzhny also underlines this, that what they are looking at as defeating Russian military. And would be interested to see what Ukraine has prepared for 2024 and how it will happen. And then finally, there was a discussion about the mobilization, and that what Zelensky has been saying about additional 450 to 500,000 new soldiers to be mobilized for Ukrainian armed forces. Zaluzhny stated that this is not something that has been requested specifically by the general staff, the armed forces, but it's more of a what the politicians are willing to supply and how they are willing to supply that, because the goal of the Ukrainian armed forces is to find the war. And this is, again, something that we do miss a lot, is that Ukraine is in a state of total war. There is a martial law in Ukraine. The fact that Ukraine is still so open for people to come in, to have business, to operate, to have some kind of plurality of opinions, is more to the glorification of how democratic and free the Ukrainian society is. Little to no other country that would have a martial law in state, and there would be military that is literally running the operations in the country, that there would be even a slight discussion about how many men should get mobilized. Very little of that would be happening there. Zaluzhny underlined and said, this is not a game. This is not some kind of a football match or like a championship or anything. It's war. It's actual people are going there and dying. It's absolutely unfair that only the best people that happen to, in 2022, join the ranks in the military of the armed forces of Ukraine that are defending the country that is in state of a total war. It should be the obligatory requirement of every citizen of Ukraine to protect the country. Thank you so much for watching this, guys. Please check out the link to support the NAFO 69 campaign that we're doing. Slava Ukraini, I love you guys, and I'll see you next time.